Hey everyone, it's your girl Layla. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, welcome back to another video. Welcome back to another Mmiw case. This particular case is very disturbing. There is a twist to it that, well, as I go into the story, you might be expecting the twist. However, how Jessica was found is really disturbing, and no family should ever go through that. While researching this case, I didn't find a whole lot. I didn't find a whole lot of news articles on it. I didn't find many websites talking about it. So I even went to YouTube. There were no videos on YouTube other than a tribute video to Jessica. So it was pretty hard to find the info that I wanted to gather for the case, but I hope I did it justice. By the way, before I get started, if you guys are not already subscribed, please go ahead, click the subscribe button below. I upload 3 times a week, Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. I have 7 pages of research, which I feel like isn't a whole lot, but I did the best I could with the info that I could find. I had originally heard about this case on a documentary here on YouTube called Where Canada's Missing Women Go, and it covered 2 Highway of Tears cases in that documentary. So Jessica's case was mentioned near the end of the video. At that time when the documentary was filmed, her case was the most recent in the area. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of information to go by. So that is frustrating in itself, because that means that major news anchors like Global National and CTV had not even covered the case. I just found one article on CBC News. So this case deserves a whole lot more attention than it got. It still remains unsolved and it still remains open. So let's go ahead and get started into the case of Jessica Patrick. Jessica Mary Patrick sometimes went by the last name of Balksner, which was her father's last name, but I'm going to be referring to her in the video as Jessica Patrick because that's how her family had mentioned her in the documentary that I watched. So I'm going to be referring back to that pretty often in this video. If you guys do want to check it out, it's called Where Canadian Missing Women Go, and I will leave the link in the description or the pinned comment. So Jessica was born on January 8th, 2000. She was from the Babin Lake First Nation and grew up in Fort Babin. After her parents split, Jessica moved to Smithers, BC and spent some time in foster care. There were very few news articles online about Jessica's case, like I mentioned earlier, so I didn't get a whole lot as far as her backstory went and how her childhood was. They did interview Jessica's aunt in the documentary. She had mentioned that Jessica would periodically stay with different family members. She would stay at her auntie's house. She'd stay with her grandmother from time to time. Jessica had a 1-year-old daughter. On August 30th, 2018, Jessica would give her daughter a really long hug. According to many of the articles that I read on this case, Jessica gave her daughter the longest hug before she left her with her grandmother that day. She said to her grandmother that she would return soon. Jessica had stated that she would be attending a motel party that evening on Highway 16 in Smithers, BC. Now, Highway 16, if you guys are not familiar with it, it is called the Highway of Tears. There's a whole Netflix documentary on the Highway of Tears. I highly recommend you guys check it out if you haven't heard of it before. If you've never heard of the Highway of Tears, definitely watch that documentary. It's just very eye-opening and it's a really well done documentary. It gives a lot of information on what's been going on up there for the past 40 years now. So I really highly recommend you guys watch it. I watched it back when it came out, I think a couple years ago. I'm going to briefly touch on it in this video. I just want you guys to know the area where Jessica went missing and what's been going on there. So I'm going to be doing a whole separate video on the Highway of Tears specifically because I feel like this is a topic that we could be discussing for hours. I don't want this story to dim the light on what I'm really talking about today, which is Jessica's case, but I feel like I do have to touch on it. So the Highway of Tears, aka Highway 16, is a 725-kilometer stretch of road between Prince George and Prince Rupert, BC. It has been the section of road that unfortunately has taken many lives over the years and has been home to many Mmiw cases over the years, dating back to the 1970s. Hitchhiking was unfortunately the culprit in many of these cases. This is the only stretch of road that connects many of the northern BC reservations to major cities like Prince George and Prince Rupert. Hitchhiking was the major mode of transportation for most women in this area, unfortunately, because of extreme poverty, drug abuse, and domestic violence. So in order for these women to get to their medical appointments, they would have to hitchhike along Highway 16 to get to the two major cities, either being Prince George or Prince Rupert. Most of these women didn't have vehicles, so hitchhiking was their only choice because this area is just so remote and there's not really any other major towns or cities along this route. There is 80 plus known victims on this stretch of road. This unfortunately is still happening to this day when I'm talking about this case. So the most recent victim being Crystal Hayes Chambers. She was 34 and she went missing last summer in August 2020. Now Smithers, where Jessica went missing, is the midpoint. It is exactly 400 kilometers away from Prince George, which is the east, and exactly 400 kilometers away from St. Rupert, which is in the west. So now you guys are familiar with the area that Jessica went missing in. Let's get back to her case. Jessica was last seen in the early hours of August 31st, 2018. This was a few days before she was officially reported missing, and why that was the case is because Jessica would periodically stay with different people. So her grandmother didn't initially think that this was suspicious that she didn't return for her daughter right away, because she would sometimes stay with her auntie, she would sometimes stay with other family members, and she would sometimes stay with her boyfriend. So her grandmother initially didn't worry when she didn't return right away. However, she did find it suspicious and weird that Jessica didn't check in on her daughter. After several days, Jessica's sister began asking around to see if anyone's seen Jessica. Jessica's aunt, Mary Nicholas, which I will be referring to some of her quotes, she stated that she did call the RCMP, but they of course didn't take her disappearance seriously, which is, it seems to be a theme on all these Mmiw cases that family members contact the RCMP, whether it be a few days after the person goes missing, whether it be 24 hours after the person goes missing, maybe even earlier, and the RCMP just doesn't take these cases that seriously. The fact that a woman disappeared on Highway 16, which is very, very well known in that area for women and girls going missing all the time. The fact that the RCMP didn't take that seriously actually bothers me, because they're still not taking it seriously, and it's been 40 years since this has started happening, and the RCMP is still not taking these cases seriously. I feel like that is something that really, really needs to change. Days after the family had contacted the RCMP originally, they had called back to make sure that Jessica was on their missing persons list, which she wasn't. Jessica's aunt, Mary, stated the following, I'll quote this: "We did everything ourselves. I gathered everyone. Basically, we were doing the investigation ourselves." This is completely unacceptable that family has to do the work of investigators. Family has to do the work for the RCMP. And what are they doing? They're not taking the case seriously. They didn't add Jessica to their missing persons list. Her family is worried about her because they haven't seen her in days. So they launched their own investigation. They launched their own search parties. This is horrible. So Mary ended up taking time off of work, and she gathered friends and family, and they all worked together. They walked around the neighborhood, they walked the streets, and they knocked on doors. They chased leads, including false leads that led them an hour away from Smithers. They drove a whole hour away from Smithers to try to follow a lead that Jessica might be there, and which she wasn't. By the time September 15th came around, everyone was tired, but she, her husband, and her nephew went out to continue searching for Jessica. They were starting to feel like something horrible happened. They decided to head up the Hudson's Bay Mountain, which I believe is a ski hill in the area. They headed up the Hudson's Bay Mountain to the lookout point. They brought along binoculars with them. Mary was more focused on the ground at this point in time, and she saw a trail of weeds. So she was looking at this trail of weeds. It looked like a weird straight line that led down an embankment. She nudged her husband and wanted him to investigate. He initially dismissed it and claimed that it was probably animal tracks, but Mary insisted that he go check it out. So her husband carefully climbed down the embankment. Near a cluster of trees about 15 meters down, her husband came across the body of Jessica, his niece. When I heard this, when I read this, it makes me want to cry, because no family member should ever have to find their missing relative. That is something that investigators should do. That is something that detectives should do. No family should ever have to find their missing loved one dead in an embankment. The family still wonders to this day why they had to search, why they had to organize the search parties, and the police didn't. There have been very few answers since then, and the police are insisting to Jessica's family members that they are still working on her case, that it is open and active. Now, the last major update to family was probably early 2020, because the article that I was reading took place in September 2020, and it had been a whole 6 months since the family has heard anything from the RCMP regarding this case. But they assured family that they were still actively working on it and they were still investigating. They have not listed any suspects regarding this case. They have not ruled anything out, so there's really nothing to go by. Nothing, no updates, nothing of that sort. They interviewed Jessica's cousin Jackie, who stated that she knows multiple women that have gone missing along the Highway of Tears, including her cousin Jessica, and all of their cases remain unsolved. Okay, now let's get into theories, shall we? So my notes on this part are a jumbled mess. They're not organized, but it was like all of my thoughts on this piece of paper. So the first thing that I wrote down was, is there a serial killer in this area? One of the comments on the documentary that I keep referring back to states that this area is a serial killer's paradise. And I would definitely have to agree with that. I would definitely have to agree with that. There is so many vulnerable women that have no choice but to hitchhike because they need to see a doctor, because they need help, because they need to see a counselor, because they need to see their family. This is the only mode of transportation to them, and this is the only mode of transportation that they know. So yeah, there's no shortage of vulnerable women that are gonna be needing rides along Highway 16. And unfortunately, we live in a world where people are just not good, and there's creeps, and there's crazy people, there's stalkers, there's serial killers, there's everything bad. Unfortunately, this stretch of road where there's no limit on the amount of victims that a serial killer could have, that's why. So I wrote down, is this the work of one or more people? Because there has been 3 major serial killers that have been caught in this area. 3, you guys. What other stretch of road in Canada can you think of that has had 3 serial killers on this highway? Like, nowhere else in Canada can I think of that. There's nowhere in the States that I can think of that. Maybe like deep south United States near Mexico, near the border and stuff. But like in Canada, this is something that really doesn't happen anywhere else besides the Highway of Tears. And the thing is, not a lot of people have heard of this road. If you are from BC, maybe you came across this Netflix series. That's really the only thing we have to go by about this stretch of road. It's like super mysterious. I'm sure that if you ask somebody in Toronto that's never been to BC, if they've heard of the Highway of Tears, if they haven't seen it on Netflix, maybe they don't have Netflix, they probably will tell you no, that they haven't heard of this stretch of road. The fact that there's been 3 killers that have been caught already, that have killed multiple people. Can't you guys see that there is a problem? There needs to be something done about this. Otherwise, we're gonna keep losing women. We're gonna keep losing girls to this stretch of highway. So the most recent serial killer that was arrested here is Cody Allen Lejbikoff. He was charged for murdering 4 women between 2009 and 2010. I researched him just a little bit so I could figure out how many women he killed and whatever. He was born a year before me. So when he was doing these killings, he was 19. He was 19. When you are a vulnerable woman and you're hitchhiking along a road and what seems to look like a harmless male teenager is stopping to give you a ride, but he actually kills you? Like, what? I mean, I wouldn't get in a car with an old, creepy looking man, because that's, in my head, what I think of a serial killer. I think of an old, creepy man. But a teenager, a harmless looking teenager at that, killed 4 women along this stretch of road. Mind-blowing. Brian Peter Arp and Edward Dennis Isaac were also serial killers charged for killing women on the Highway of Tears. Now, the last one I mentioned, Edward Dennis Isaac, he was actually an American truck driver. So I remember this from the Highway of Tears documentary. He killed a lot of women. These people are so disgusting. That leads me to the question, why are serial killers so attracted to this stretch of road, to this area in particular? Well, the answer is the remoteness of it. The fact that they will always have their victims available to them. There is also a lot of trees in the area. This is a heavily forested area of northern BC. There's no lack of places that you could easily conceal a body, unfortunately, and that's what seems to be happening. Okay, so I also wrote down possibly 1 active or more serial killers killing on this area right now. So whether they are living there, whether they are just passing through, there is either 1 or more active serial killers on Highway 16, and that is scary. If you look at a list online of women that are currently missing, women that have cases that are currently unsolved on the Highway 16, Jessica's case isn't, like I said, it's not even close to being the most recent case now. This was back in 2018, and there's been so many in 2019, so many in 2020, that leads me to believe there is an active serial killer in this area. The theory that they are just passing through, that sometimes sort of makes sense, but the fact that Jessica was actually found at the bottom of a ski hill, Hudson's Bay Mountain, it led Jessica's family to believe that this person knew the area well, so they likely lived there. A couple theories that I have on this case is the night Jessica went missing, she was likely hitchhiking on Highway 16. It wasn't written anywhere else that Jessica periodically went hitchhiking, that she went looking for rides by herself, but that is one of the things that I did write down. She could have possibly been hitchhiking that night that she went missing, or she could have just been walking along the highway. Somebody snatched her up. I also had to write this down, even though it's very unlikely, that Jessica met somebody at the party that night that had bad intentions for her. This would make sense because the person seemed to know where to dump a body, where to conceal a body for what, like 16 days? That could be something that happened. She could have met somebody at the party, but I feel like that is pretty unlikely because of all the cases of missing women. They're all completely unrelated to each other. So I feel like this is an unlikely theory that happened. I feel like it's more likely that she was either hitchhiking or walking along Highway 16 the night she went missing. That is it. That's all I have for you guys on this case. And I'm so sad that there isn't more media coverage regarding this case, that there isn't more, just more to go by. There's not a whole lot online that I found about it. So I'm hoping that I did it justice. If you guys are not already subscribed, please go ahead, click the subscribe button below. I upload 3 times a week, Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.